We're very happy to have you here. We're going to talk about a fascinating subject, which is Alibaba. We have a resident expert today who's going to talk about the subject. Before we get in and introduce Oscar, for those out there that don't know, Alibaba is twice the size of Walmart. Massive. So in the US, everyone, we think about Walmart, we think about the big names in the US, but for those out there, Alibaba, again, more than twice the size of Walmart. Fascinating subject. So, Oscar, would you mind introducing yourself?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. I volunteered on that previous episode to do a little bit more on Alibaba, so I'm very happy to be here. I'm Oskar Kaszubski. I'm a former global VP of e-commerce for Kellogg. Prior to Kellogg, I've worked at Kimberly-Clark as well as at Mondelez, so I know all about how to run global brands online.
So thanks for volunteering and coming back, man. We had to get him back once he raised his hand. It was episode 12, if I remember correctly.
I think so,
Globalization of
yeah,
e-commerce.
yeah.
See what happens? I just think on our e-talk show featuring Don and Sri, people just want to come back. So thank you for doing it. So, we're talking Alibaba. What comes to your mind when you think Alibaba?
Treasure trove.
Treasure trove. So I'm thinking something very similar. Having been raised in an Eastern Indian descent, my heritage, I think of the actual Alibaba story, like Alibaba and the 40 thieves and the treasure trove he was after. But the word that really comes to me is open sesame. That was like the magic word to open the cave with the treasure, right? And I feel like the actual Alibaba.com is like a treasure trove. Like people who actually launch on Alibaba, heard of this, which I'm going to ask you to tell us later about Singles Day on Alibaba, but I've heard that brands who want to launch in China, they actually launch on Singles Day, and on one day they're selling something like $100 million, which here in the United States, I don't think we can even comprehend what that means.
All right, Oscar, one of the things I think of when I think of the term Alibaba is truly unlocked opportunity globally. I think many brands are trying to find ways to access the treasure that you mentioned, and I think it poses such a unique opportunity at scale for brands to leverage. For those out there, you really want to pay attention at this point in time, so maybe hit pause, go grab a drink, and then come back, because if you want to know about Alibaba, this is the guy, and he's about to tell us key secrets. With that being said, Oscar, tell us about Alibaba. Tell us all that you know. Give us the top 2 or 3 secrets that brands should think about when it comes to Alibaba and global e-commerce.
Absolutely, but first, are we getting a drink too, or just our viewers?
We will after.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll hold you to
Yeah.
it. I think the key with Alibaba is this. Number one is you have to understand the ecosystem, right? And whatever they're going to do is they're going to do it at a massive scale. So even if they have a great omni-channel with their Hema store, which is just launched, it's their grocery store, they're not going to do a pilot only with 1 or 2 stores. They're going to launch it at 100, 200 locations. So whatever they do it at a massive scale. So that's number one. Number two is there is only a limited window where you can actually work with Alibaba. They are very conscious about the supply and the demand and what their Chinese consumer want. So they're going to be on you to, list your product or, kind of broker your brand, but the timing is going to be very short. It might be 1 month to 2 months. A lot of the times it comes down after what's happening with the cross-border, which we discussed in the previous episode. So once the cross-border get going, and then there is a pool for the Chinese consumer, they will ask you to start participating in a massive event. So it could be 11/11, which a lot of the brands are using 11/11 to launch their product at scale in China. But that window is going to be very short. So if you want to make sure that you're going to execute it flawlessly, you got to make sure that you're going to do it first and you do it right, because you're not going to have a second chance. Chinese consumers will going to move to other brands. They're going to very quickly kind of make up their minds. So you have a very short window.
So let's tease that out a little bit. I think when you talk about time and you talk about scale, take us into an imaginary room with a new product development director or vice president in CPG. How do you successfully navigate those conversations within a CPG, knowing that you're going to have scale with Alibaba and you know that you only have a limited time window? What success have you seen working with the big brands that you've worked with in your career?
Number one is I would definitely leverage Alibaba's brand bank, because Alibaba can show you how your potential buyers are actually acting and interacting with the Alibaba ecosystem. So Alibaba has a completely different philosophy when it comes into data sharing and helping brands to figure out what's the best way to thrive on that ecosystem versus Amazon in the US. So you have to, when you talk to actually, let's say a global director that is based in, North America, they might not be used to share a lot of the information or their internal CRM with Alibaba because they would be worried that, they can actually steal any proprietary information. This is all about partnership. This is all about having the right people in the room. As you know, in China, e-commerce, it's a very hierarchical. If, for a global guy like, ourselves, to make the biggest impact, for the regional team in China, few things can happen, right? Number one is we can actually set it up at JBP. It's much easier to set it up
Great
JBP
point.
coming from outside, especially utilizing your cross-border team. That's number one. Number two is bring your president, bring your head of BU into that meeting, because your role as the VP of e-commerce is to ensure that this first meeting has the highest representations from your company, because Alibaba needs to understand our commitment to the cause. You're not going to see a GM of a given category once or twice. You have only a very limited time to make a first good impression.
Great point.
So that's one. But there's also a secret. So let me tell you a story.
I love secrets.
So let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
We met at one of the Alibaba meetings, Patrick Jennings. Patrick Jennings was an American that spoke Mandarin that Alibaba hired to create the bridges with the Western brands, very closely. Guess what Patrick Jennings was from? Patrick Jennings was actually from Battle Creek, where Kellogg is based. So think about the attention to details of understanding truly how to make the brands at ease. They actually had somebody, native speaking American, that was helping the projects come along and doing both business development as well as project management. So they are very much ahead, and they understand that this is not, East meets West.
Yeah.
This is East evolve meeting West that might not have an idea what they're actually getting into it. So that's very absolutely critical to have that first interaction very well done, and kind of understanding, how to make a, big impact, and, how to make that 11-11 or 12-12 a great success.
Awesome perspective.
So Oscar, Alibaba, Don and you just discussed at length, right? Alibaba, such a global phenomenon, huge company. You talked about 11-11. Don asked you some questions about how JBPs work, etc. Big question for you is, why is it that in the US we're not focused on Alibaba and it's such an Amazon-focused market? And how could one start in the US?
I think, there are a few things that play. Number one is, a lot of the consumers here in the US, they don't really have a trust yet for the Chinese players because they are not exposed to it. They hear that, 11-11 is much bigger than Black Friday, Cyber Monday, but it's very abstract to them. So I think, Alibaba has tried before, to come into the US market. They launched 11 Main. But I think what would make really sense is for a Chinese, e-commerce juggernaut like Alibaba to actually buy a local player to invest into it. I'll give you an example. Volvo, great Swedish brand, of cars manufactured, but it's actually now owned by Chinese. It's much easier for Alibaba to buy an existing player, invest into them, bring their mobile technology, bring their VR technology, smart shelves, etc., and then use this as an opportunity, to kind of truly learn the US market and just move forward, right? So I'm thinking, Kroger, I'm thinking, even some smaller spray, Albertson, Safeways, etc. It's always, could be a play. I think a lot of also Alibaba knows about some of the lessons that the UK supermarkets had and grocery stores coming into the US. Tesco failed miserably, Sainsbury also failed miserably. But the challenge what it was never really that launch done at scale at the right time. Because, even Tesco, when they actually launched in the US, they focused only on two markets, which was California and then Nevada. It was at the wrong time just because of the recession. So, buying an existing player and not recreating it from start, it's absolutely critical, because, you don't need your Alibaba brand at the beginning. You can then toggle on it. So I would buy an existing player and then, for example, launch HEMA stores, to build the brand equity for it.
So let's say that happens and they launch in the US by buying an existing player. Should US customer teams, should the US market then evolve to quickly form a customer team for Alibaba? Because I don't think one exists in the US marketplace today, or people aren't looking at it.
They're not. I mean, the only thing what we are seeing is on the global teams. There are cross-border teams or key global accounts teams. Like that's the only expertise that is US when it comes into Alibaba. I still think fundamentally they're not going to change how the stores would be operating here if they would acquire an existing player. I think what would change is they would bring in their technology that they are doing at scale, where they are innovating, focus on mobile payments, for example, through Alipay. Amazon Go type of stores, without, checkout aisles, etc. I think these are some of the kind of marquee things that they would actually bring in. The challenge is always to understand, understand the US shoppers, what are their preferences? I have a lot of expertise in grocery. People in the US don't like in other countries, do grocery every day. They buy it on a weekly basis. That changes that mentality in terms of, how to sell it to them, those bigger baskets. Ironically, those bigger baskets would be perfect for e-commerce. So I actually think there is a lot of value in it to figure out, pick up locations, do it online, as a, click and collect. And then, eventually once we figure out the technology to do a last mile delivery through autonomous pods.
Thank you so much, Oscar. That was great listening to the Alibaba from you. Of course, for our viewers on November the 11th, 11/11 that Oscar mentioned, make sure to go to Alibaba.com and see what is this phenomenon called Singles Day. I'm not kidding, guys. There are brands selling $100 million on one single day of 11/11, which is just absolutely fascinating sitting here and watching this play out from the US. But thank you so much for coming on our show again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me again.
You don't want to volunteer for a third one?
I don't know. Let's see it. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of topics. The space is evolving very quickly.
I'm going to bet you're going to come back, man. So thank you again.
Yeah.
And we said a lot, but if you want to know more about this phenomenon called Alibaba, feel free to reach out to either Don Brett or Shri. You can just ping us on LinkedIn. And remember, next Monday we're back with episode. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you.